Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Women's History Month, and welcome to Casa LA's Fireside Chat. I am Charity Chandler Cole, the CEO of Casa LA. At Casa LA, we organize the community to show up in life and in court to advocate for children and families in LA County's overburdened child welfare and juvenile justice systems. Through an intentional, restorative, and culturally responsive lens, we train a village of committed, consistent, and caring adults who provide equitable, life-affirming connections. Our vision is a Los Angeles County in which all children and families have equitable access to the resources and support they need to be whole and thrive. Our mission and vision cannot be accomplished until our children live in a world that is equitable and just. That's why we are committed to doing our part to address racial injustice in the child welfare and juvenile justice systems, and using this platform, our fireside chats, to bring communities and various stakeholders together to have real conversations about what's happening in the world of child welfare in LA County, with the hope of building awareness, informing our communities, activating a safe space for all, and strengthening our ability to advocate for our youth. Today, I have the privilege and honor of introducing you to a phenomenal group of people, many of whom I call friends, who are dedicated to transforming the lives of our youth and families in LA County and beyond. We have Judge Zig Zeiler, who I just so appreciate and adore, who was elected to the bench of the Los Angeles County Superior Court in 2004. Prior to that, he served as a Superior Court referee for over 6 years, presiding over cases that involve child abuse and neglect. Judge Zeiler has chaired the committee that creates anti-bias and ethics curriculum for judicial officers and court staff throughout California. Laura is a licensed foster parent in California who creates educational content about life as a foster parent, parenting kids who have experienced trauma, and parenting neurodivergent kids. Most of you will recognize her as at Fostering Parenting on TikTok and IG. And I was just telling her earlier, I was obsessing over her IG today. Amazing content, and just so grateful to have you, Laura. Brittany Walker is the founder and CEO of Butterflies Haven, a nonprofit organization whose mission is to create shared living communities for young single moms and their children, all of whom have experienced homelessness or are at risk. Today is also Brittany's birthday, so happy birthday, Brittany, and someone I call a dear friend and sister. Frank Ahn, a supervising attorney with the law office of Martin Lee, one of the 5 firms in Los Angeles dependency lawyers, Ladle, that serves as court-appointed counsel for parents in the dependency system. Since 2014, Frank has helped parents navigate through the LA County dependency system as a trial attorney in the Lancaster and Monterey Park courthouses, as well as appellate counsel at the 2nd District Court of Appeal. And last but certainly not least, Priscilla Diaz, who is a county-wide lead parent partner with Parents in Partnership, also known as PIP, a program where a committed group of parent partners who have firsthand knowledge of this experience collaborate with DCFS to help support, educate, and empower parents who have lost custody of their children and are seeking reunification. Thank you all so much for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us, and welcome to our fireside chat. For our audience, we will take a few questions towards the end if time permits. So please submit a question in the Q&A if you have one. So let's get into it. Family preservation or reunification, i.e. when a child returns to live with the family they were removed from, is, in my opinion, the best outcome for a child in foster care in most cases. Research has shown that separating children from their birth families is traumatic and has long-lasting effects on their mental, emotional, and physical health. Unsurprisingly, while disparities and disproportionality exist in child referrals and removals, they are also prevalent in family reunification as well. So today, let's talk about this. To my panel, what does family reunification mean? Why does it matter? What are your thoughts, feelings, and understanding of reunification? And what does this or has this meant to you in particular? And I'll throw it to anyone who wants to take the lead on that one. Let's go with Frank. I'm gonna call you up. Frank. Oh, go ahead, Priscilla. I see you on mic.
So as a mother of a child that was dependent of the court, reunification to me was a chance to prove to my daughter that I can be everything that she needed me to be. At the beginning of my case, I was in denial, and I didn't think I was living wrong because that was the only way I knew how to live. And so I didn't really see anything wrong with the way I was living. I had to learn some things along the way, but reunification was an opportunity for me to realized that I was putting my daughter in dangerous situations. It was an opportunity for me to break life, to break the cycle, you know, the dysfunction that was so long in our family. And like I said, more than anything, it was the opportunity for me to prove not only to the courts and to DCFS, but more so than anything to my daughter that I can be everything that she needed me to be and provide her structure and safety and love and all that good stuff. And I'm very much thankful for DCFS and the courts and their opportunity for me to prove that to my daughter.
Thank you, Priscilla. And you offer such an amazing and necessary perspective as a family that went through reunification. So thank you so much for your contribution today. Frank.
Well, first, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be included in this panel, and I'm very much humbled by the work that everyone's doing. The person I'm most familiar with, of course, is Judge Leidler, because we're both at court together, and he's widely regarded as one of the best judges in the courthouse. You are. I saw the look on your face, but you're very respected, and you are a champion of the hard work that we're doing for the communities that we try to serve here. What does reunification mean? Well, from a legal perspective, it is the emphasis. It is what the law emphasizes, that the focus under WIC Section 300.2, first and foremost, is the protection and safety of children. Of course, why would they be brought to court if not for some potential issue? However, right in the middle of that statute, WIC Section 300.2, it talks about how the focus of these proceedings is on preservation and reunification of the family. Why is that important? It's one of those questions where, like, where do you begin? I think I told you separately via email. Some of these questions that you shared with us are so loaded because there's a million things that you could say about each of them. But why is it important? I could start anecdotally. In my experience, I find that that's what's best for children, that being with their own parents, they're not strangers, not people who are trying to replace parents and serve that same purpose. Generally speaking, that is what's best for them emotionally, psychologically. I think as human beings, we naturally love reconciliation. There's just some natural component when it comes to just reunifying or resolving any differences or reconciling even with your own family that brings healing, that brings growth and strength. It really is the best possible thing for a human being's development. And I think that's why it's so important. It's a complicated system where sometimes things look like they're being done backwards. There are revenue streams, for example, for foster parents to get federal funding. But parents, when they keep their kids and they're in the system, they don't get that funding. So that emphasis doesn't seem to be there in some of the more common sense aspects of how we run dependency court, when it really is the most important thing. So that's why it's most important. In most cases, I'm not speaking for everyone, but for most cases, truly, it is what's best for the child. And it's also what's best for the parent as well. I think we sometimes forget the parent's perspective. I would say more than half of the clients I've ever represented were dependents themselves in the system before they became parents. So we have to talk about that perspective. Why do we suddenly forget about them once they become adults and have their own children? And suddenly it's about protecting the children only when they were just children, in some cases, a few months ago. I think that perspective is important too. So yeah, just legally and personally, I think that's why reunification is so important.
You know, when I speak to new Casa classes, one of the things I point out is that most of our cases are not severe physical abuse and severe sexual abuse. Most of our cases are parents with drug and alcohol issues or violence in the home or mental health issues. And almost all of our cases, you have kids who love their parents, even when it's inappropriate physical discipline or physical abuse of some kind. Those kids love their parents and they want to be home. They don't always understand what's happening and why they're being taken out of the home. And so often later on, when it gets to, okay, can we reunify them? This was the issue they were supposed to deal with. And suddenly social workers raising, well, what about this? You know, even though they're in a drug program, they aren't interacting well with the child. Well, that wasn't the issue, and that wasn't the safety factor. A big part of reunification is making sure we are looking at the safety factor that brought them into the system and that took them out of their parents' care. The other one is often workers are, well, they haven't completed their programs yet. Well, that's not our system. Our system is, can the child be safely in that home with services in place? And just because they haven't completed the program, are they far enough along that they're able to now show some protective capacity with some monitoring and supervision? And, you know, the reality is our system is the family regulation system that is talked about and complained about. But the positive aspect of that in terms of reunification is, can that child be safely in that home with regulation in place, with supervision in place? And the last thing I want to say right now is, watching the video, I've said this a lot lately when we're talking about blind removal and the blind removal concept. There was a period where I had all the Pasadena DCFS cases, and they were involved, we were involved nationwide in a study around disproportionality. And at some point I said to the Pasadena office folks, you know, I'm not seeing a lot of Black kids coming into my courtroom from Pasadena cases. So why are we involved in this disproportionality study? And they said, because for us, the disproportionality is at the back end. And it's with those kids who are in what at the time was long-term foster care. That we're not getting those kids back home. Not only that, we're not getting them adopted or in guardianship or in foster homes that are providing permanence in that form. They're the ones ending up in the STRTP, the group home. So the reality is that failure to reunify kids with parents for a lot of those kids, especially the older ones, means dragged out years in the system, non-minor dependence at the end, as opposed to that loving home that they're able to be raised in.
Absolutely. Thank you. And Frank, you said something that I constantly scream and shout and bug folks about, is the fact that a lot of our children whose children are removed are former foster youth themselves. And it drives me nuts when we take children or put children in the system for the sake of child protection and child welfare, and then we do not ensure they have the tools and resources they need to then come out of the system that's supposed to be better than where they were, to then become effective and successful parents. And when they fail, which means we fail, because it wasn't really them failing, when they fail, or we say they fail, we then take their children and then put them through this whole process where they were never set up essentially to really respond effectively to it. And so I want to kind of touch on that as well, because when we're thinking about reunification and all that goes with it, there are first and foremost so many stereotypes around not just reunification, the process, but the mothers and parents that are going through that process that the broader society has come to believe. Let's talk about what some of these stereotypes are, why they're problematic, and how do they contribute to the disproportionality we see around reunification. I'd like to start that one off. And maybe I'll start that one. Y'all know I talk way too much in these fireside chats. I told myself today I'm not going to be doing a whole bunch of talking. But, you know, when we think of the reunification process, and you said something, Priscilla, where for you was an opportunity to prove that, you know, you were a good mom and that you were worthy and that it was something that was important and necessary to you. But there's a lot of other parents who look at it as it's a got you moment. It's an opportunity for the system to prove that they shouldn't have their children, that they don't deserve to have their children, that they're not worthy of their children. And the question is why? And I think a lot of that stems from, you know, this larger perspective or our idea that Black and brown parents cannot effectively parent their children. They won't follow directions or follow rules, many of which, you know, Judge Zeiler touched on this also, are, you know, they're have to check off a list where a lot of the things they're asked to do don't really correspond to the reason why their children were removed in the first place. And then there's just so many barriers set up that feel as if it's actually against them. And so why do we look at parents that are going through a reunification process? And you said it additionally, Judge Zeiler, that they're not focusing on the strengths necessarily, but really focusing on other things that really don't count or really don't factor in. And the question is why? And I know Frank, you said there's so many, it's so broad and there's so much to talk about, but let's be honest and talk about what are some of these stereotypes that we as a society really think of and feel implicitly or not about parents that are going through this process. Priscilla, what did you feel?
And so, you know what, I was gonna wanted to speak to that too, because so I had my daughter detained from me twice. The first time was because I was selling drugs and I was an active gang member. They raided my house and found some guns and a bunch of drugs they took her. I put everything aside, did what I had to do, but I really didn't change like the way I was living. It wasn't even like 8 months before I was in an altercation with a rival gang member, and I almost killed him in front of my, at that time, 3-year-old. And so of course my daughter was taken from me. And I remember at court, they were saying that I was detrimental to her well-being, that I didn't deserve to have animals in my care. And I sat there in my county blues, like, because so let me just tell you, so I was brought up in a dysfunctional family. I was born addicted to heroin. My mother, my grandparents, everybody in my whole family, they were drug addicts. And I know it sounds crazy, but we didn't view ourselves as dysfunctional because there was not sexual abuse or nothing going on, right? We were like the lesser of the evils, so to say. And so our life for me like that was normal, you know? And so when they told me that I was detrimental to my daughter's well-being, I was like, well, hold up. Like, my daughter doesn't get physically abused. My daughter's never been sexually abused. None of the kids, you know? And so my thinking was way off. And so, but yeah, of course, still I had to realize, like, having my daughter around guns and drugs and gangs, like that's no way safe for her in any way, shape, or form. I just didn't view it that way. And when the court told me that they were putting my daughter up for fast track adoption, I was like, excuse me, like, you guys give child molesters the chance to get their kids back, or, you know, the rights to have visits, and you're telling me I can't see my daughter again because, yes, because what I did was crazy. But I feel like I deserved a chance. I was so quick to be looked down upon, but didn't nobody ask me why I was the way I was. My mother was in and out of prison my whole life. I didn't meet my dad until he was 8. My mom went to prison when I was like 6 months old, and she didn't get out till I was 3. So I was raised with different family members because they were trying to keep me from DCFS, right? So I was bounced around. And then even within them, they were dysfunctional. They were all heroin addicts. My grandfather was my grandma was a heroin addict. They were both from the same gang, you know? And so it was like, you guys, people expect us to know how to be parents. We never even had parents. I did the best I could. I knew that when I got pregnant, I had to stop using drugs, right? So that's what I did. I stopped using drugs, and I thought that I was a great mother because I stopped using drugs when I was pregnant. But I was continuing to sell drugs. I was continuing to involve myself around people that I shouldn't have, but because I didn't know any better, you know. And yeah. I think the culture that I had came from, I was so quick to be judged. They weren't trying to give me the opportunity to prove to society, to the system, to my daughter that I can be a great person, parent, citizen, everything, you know. I just needed the chance, and I needed somebody to guide me because I didn't know. I thought that because my daughter had Nike, you know, Jordans on or whatever, you know, and she had like good clothes, like I was being a good mother, you know, because I was providing for her that she was a-okay. But in all reality, like, no, there's a lot more to it than that. But I needed to learn that, you know, and I needed a chance to really be surrounded by people, you know, that lived a better life, that lived, I guess, to say a normal life, because I lived nothing kind of normal, you know. And so I think that when just we're judged off the bat, you know, and this is where I love the CFT process, because a lot of times within that CFT process, you get to hear the family story, you know, you get to hear why they have all these issues going on, you know, you get to hear what it is that made them the way that we are, you know, because we don't just wake up like, oh, I'm going to be a dope fiend today. No, we don't. We don't just wake up like, I'm going to walk around with a shotgun in my diaper bag. No, you know, like, it was survival of the fittest. I never had a chance to be a kid. I was in survival from the moment I was born. You know, I was in survival mode. And even now, with my daughter growing up after having her back, we had to go to parenting. I mean, we had to go to conjoint counseling because I was still living like I was in survival mode, you know, and I had to be mindful of her opinions, her feelings, all the feelings I never had because I never had an opportunity to have. I had to shut those feelings out because if you were weak, if you had feelings, you were weak, you know? So I didn't have the opportunity to have feelings and feel sad and feel like, no, I had to keep it pushing all the time, like my whole life, you know? And so I think just, it sucks that parents are, and especially when it comes to African-American families, like as soon as, you know, and it's terrible, as soon as they're coming to the lobby and they're like, you hear workers like, oh gosh, these people, and it's like, what? Like they're people just like me and you, just like we're all the same. We're all going to be buried the same way. We all came from the same heavens, and they're upset, you know, just because somebody's tone of voice is a little bit louder. I'm a super loud person, you know, that doesn't mean that they're irate, or it doesn't mean that they're angry. It doesn't mean, you know, and not only that, but if your kids are just taken and you don't understand why, because you don't know anything better, then of course you're going to be mad too, you know. And instead of being so quick to judge or like want to call the cops or kick them out, you know, like why not trying to listen to them and try to calm down, you know, like try to decrease diffuse the situation instead of making things worse. But I got off on a tangent. Hope I
No,
answered the question.
Priscilla, thank you. I mean, I just appreciate and respect your vulnerability and transparency, and thank you for just being authentic with us. And you know, you brought it, and I'm a big crybaby. Like I act like I'm tough and hard, but I'm really like a softie and I cry a lot. But you made me think of how, you know, regardless of the paths we walked, you know, no one really steps back to ask, you know, and I say that all the time with my story, you know, how did it happen? Why did it happen? How can we help you? And so when my nephew was removed from his mother, and I was a relative caregiver for almost 13 years, you know, looking back at her reunification process, I remember, you know, and even, you know, not just reunification, just in general, I remember how she was treated, how she was looked at. She was, you know, pregnant at 15 years old, gave birth to him at 16, and she was treated like, you know, she was trash. She was treated as if she was worthless and not worthy of having her child. Like she just messed up and she did something so wrong that she didn't deserve to be a mother. And me being only a few years older than her and coming up in a society where we're taught to hate each other, where we're taught to even look down on each other, you know, and I say this all the time, how, you know, it bothers me to this day, how we, even as her family and friends, you know, how we had that same perception with her, like, how dare you get pregnant at 15? Like I wasn't just right there with her. We were pregnant together, pregnant at 18, but somehow me being 18 was just a little bit better, you know, and we judged her. We didn't really look at the fact that she was, you know, exploited, you know, as a teenager, and how she was, you know, experiencing, you know, she was running away, experiencing homelessness and substance use and all these things. And instead of looking at her as a product of her environment, as, you know, being, you know, brought up in a system and in a society that, you know, isn't leveled, and that creates spaces and opportunity for us to fail intentionally, in my opinion, and how instead of looking at this as an opportunity to say, what can we do to help this teenage mom, you know, be the best parent possible? How do we address some of the things she's experienced? How do we give her the tools and resources she needs, you know, to thrive and succeed? We instead took her child away from her and, you know, gave her this laundry list of requirements that as a child, she couldn't really process, but then also we fail to realize, you know, we talk a lot about the trauma and harm and mental and physical and emotional trauma children experience from being removed from their parents, but we don't talk about the mental, emotional, physical trauma that the parents experience. And so what we didn't see in that moment was that while she's being told to do all these things, that she was literally dying inside. Her child was just removed and taken from her. And we didn't consider that till years later, that she was not in the space to be in her right mind to do what she needed to do to take care of her child. And the only thing she could do to cope with that was to continue smoking. Mind you, we're talking about weed. I'm on the grades. We're talking about weed. You know, continue to smoke marijuana because that numbed her pain. That allowed her to escape even momentarily what she was experiencing and not having her child by her side. And at that age, not even being able to articulate and advocate for herself and articulate what she was going through or what she needed. And so, and no one asked her, you know, why, what was going on. And so, and because of that, we already have these preconceived notions and stereotypes in our minds about, who these parents are, where they come from, and they're defined by those one mistakes. They're defined by, the things they've done in their life. And for women, more 9 times out of 10 out of a need to survive. And so that's something we need to address. And when we ask, how do we address that? How do we help parents, that have experienced things that Priscilla's experienced and my sister's experienced, and so many mothers have experienced? How do we help them be successful in their reunification process? What does that look like, or what should that look like if we were to be successful?
You're really going to move on just like that?
Bring it. If you want to.
Well, because there's so much there, because Priscilla also touched on other things, like someone sent a chat only to us that says anti-Blackness seeps into many people's psyche, including Black people. Inherent bias should be addressed in all workers who are in human services. And Priscilla talked about communication styles. And it's always amazed me that if a worker walks up to a door and is about to take your child away, and you suddenly actually react to that because you care about your child, you're viewed as being angry and acting out and all those things. But if you just sit back, then at the same time, you're going to be as, oh, they don't love their kid. They didn't even care. They're disconnected. So that's always concerned me. And I used to be a lawyer in a courtroom with a Black woman judge. And often she would say something that I could never say, which she would say to a parent, stop acting, don't be acting out with me. And it's always stuck in my mind as a white guy hearing a Black woman judge say that to a Black parent, that one, she could say it, I can't, but two, should we even be thinking that way? Because it's not acting out. It's expressing your feelings, it's expressing your emotions. It might be doing it a way that's not culturally connected to my culture, but it's not necessarily acting out. So that's one of the things I wanted to follow up on from what Priscilla said. And your earlier question about what stereotypes are there out there in the world. I think one problem that we all face in our system is everyone thinks of this system as, oh, when they don't take kids away, they die. We read in the newspaper about these kids who die who were left with their parents, the kids who die who were put with these relatives in these foster homes. And so there's this view of the parents in our system as posing such incredible risk to kids. And so that fear, often on social workers' part and societally, of if something happens to this kid because we reunified them, how is it going to come back to me? And I think that's a major thing out there in the world that definitely impacts more kids being taken away at the beginning, especially depending on what year we're in, because our system is this pendulum. We start dealing with all these upfront services to keep kids from being taken away. And the minute 1 or 2 of them die in a parent's home that were left there, suddenly we start removing every single kid because we're so afraid. And then the same thing happens with the reunification as well, and slowing down reunification. So sorry, that you just got me going on all these different things.
I see Brittany on, and I have a comment for that, but I see Brittany on mic. So, because you hit it on the nail, Jag. Brittany.
I just wanted to share that when children are then taken from their parents, you spoke on it, that it should be in place where the parent is then also the same services that the child receives, the counseling, the support should then be implemented for the parent as well. Because a lot of times when children are then taken from their parents, the parent is forgot about. It's like, you have to take all these classes, you need to do this, you need to do that, but no one's taken time to say, hey, how are you feeling? Are you okay? Again, why are you upset? Your child is just taken away. Naturally, you're going to be upset, especially if, and Priscilla spoke on it, if you don't see a problem with your parenting style. So of course, naturally, you're going to be upset. Your emotions are going to be all over the place. And then I've seen it firsthand where a Black father was actually upset because one, the allegations that in fact were allocated were definitely in fact not true. But because he was in court and he was upset and he had a frown on his face, he was perceived as angry, mean, and it was like, it was no support in regards to, let's do counseling with the child and the parent, the father. Let's dig deeper. Why are you upset as a father and your child was taken away? It was a lot of different things that occurred with this particular case I'm speaking about. And once they actually sat the father down and did dig a little deeper, but it was already like to a point to where the child was then removed and reunification was then started, but it was like months into it before they took the time to sit down and say, well, what's going on? And then he started expressing himself and they realized like, oh, you're not actually the problem. This is what's going on. The mother was like on drugs and was making allegations, and he's like submitting to like all these alcohol. He wasn't the one that was under the influence of drugs or alcohol, but they then told him, you have to then go take alcohol and drug testing whenever we say random testing and all these things. And it was just, I don't think when the children are then being taken, it's like, it should be a system in place where you then go in and say, okay, let's start with counseling. Before we even say you need to go take these parenting classes and all of these, let's start with counseling. Let's see how you're actually feeling with us then removing the child. And then, yes, let's go into different parenting styles. Let's teach what is then different from your parenting style, from what is considered the norm of what parenting should and look and feel like. Because a lot of times in our community, we were taught different, and the way that we were brought up is totally different from what some of our friends or our other colleagues may have been brought up by. And when you don't get a chance to see the difference, you don't know any better. And then oftentimes you're then dinged because you really in fact don't know any better, but no one's taking the time to teach and to show that. And I think that is something that should be considered moving forward, like in the process of like, yes, we're reunifying, but encourage, and then just being there for the parent and encouraging them, hey, let's try and get you more visitation with your children. Let's try like to show, like foster parents are then put in place and the foster care system is put in place to be temporary. And it should always possibly, if it's feasible, for the child to then be returned home. And I think sometimes the foster parents don't all the time necessarily even want to like engage with the parent because they have a stereotype of now, because the child was taken away, that they're a horrible person. And in fact, that's just not the case. So that's just my opinion on it.
Thank you, Laura. What do you have?
Yeah, I'd love to jump in. Yeah, no, thank you. So many amazing points here. And I think everyone's speaking of kind of the judgment and Brittany, you talked about therapy. I want to piggyback onto that. From our point of view, it's often a very big question, like, why aren't we doing therapy with the children and their parents?
Right.
You know, I'm especially little ones, I'm sitting in therapy with them thinking to myself, why isn't mom here, you know, learning with me or being a part of this? And what I personally have run into is just, you know, red tape. There's confidentiality. There's all these reasons why the therapist can't be there for the visit or the session. And I think, wow, what an amazing opportunity to bring us all together and, you know, learn how to support the kids and the family. Something Priscilla mentioned was a CFT meeting is another amazing place for foster parents to sit back and listen and learn about what is going on with that family and how we can insert ourselves to help and support with reunification. You know, maybe they need us to help them learn how to do, you know, basic, you know, diapering or mixing formula. Maybe, you know, maybe we need to spend a couple extra minutes doing that, or maybe they just need a cheerleader. And, you know, these CFT meetings are so critical, and time again, in my experience, and also working with other families, they don't always include the biological family. And you know, sometimes for one reason or another, workers want them separate. And I think, you know, my best experiences are when I get to sit in those meetings with the family, and even if the kids are there too, seeing everyone engage, and it really allows us to have a more complete understanding of what the family needs and to understand their situation and to get rid of our own judgments or our own opinions.
Love what you said. Oh, was someone, go ahead, Frank.
I know this is only the second question, so
It's okay, it's
we're
good.
taking a
We
long
touched on
time on
a lot
this
of
question,
points, so
but
we're good.
I think obviously stereotypes exist in and outside of the dependency system. What gives weight to these stereotypes is when a person has baggage that's associated with that stereotype and therefore believes it or follows it. And this is going to sound crazy, especially coming from me, a parent's attorney. But one of the things I've thought would help at least partially resolve some of the issues I've seen is actually counseling or therapy or training of some sort, if it doesn't already exist, for the social workers. Because in my experience, in many ways, they become victims themselves as well. A lot of social workers, the longer they do the job, the more trauma that they get associated with, that the more trauma they experience vicariously, the more abuse or neglect they can also witness, and the more times they get burned, if I'm being blunt, to the point where they don't believe anyone when they're investigating a parent. Every time they talk to a parent, they think, oh, well, that's abuse or neglect. They don't give anybody the benefit of the doubt. They're the ones that ultimately, in a lot of these cases, they have so much power, but their own baggage, their own trauma from this work, which is so hard, really frames the issues in a way where reunification becomes so much harder because they have these stereotypes going in to what they're doing from their prior experience. In a lot of these cases, we have great social workers too. We have some not so good ones, but we have some great social workers. In fact, I feel like a lot of the newer ones, they're very optimistic, they're very idealistic. They graduate with their MSW in a lot of these cases, and they come to work for DCFS. And then by year 5, year 10 maybe, a lot of that idealism fades, and they're yelling at this. Obviously, they're not going to talk about how they talk to the parent in their reports. It's only what the parent did wrong in the reports. But they're talking or communicating with parents in a way that really doesn't facilitate things. And I find this to be incredibly common. The other thing I think when I hear the word stereotype, or not stereotype, stereotype about dependency, is that very term, child abuse or child neglect, is very inflammatory, actually. Before I joined dependency, I was in the criminal world. And there's this saying that you win your trial. Well, you win your trial during jury selection. But there's some trials that you win as a prosecutor when they read the verdict. Not the verdict, they read the charge, excuse me. When they read the charge. So, believe it or not, prostitution, substance abuse related charges, a lot of those go not guilty, actually, because a lot of jurors are thinking, why should I care? Why should I be involved? But when they hear sexual abuse, they're like, oh, all right, we can't let it fly.
Frank, what you're saying is really, really important. And your headphones, the sound is off. When you lean forward, it actually works just fine.
Okay, I'm sorry. Thank you for letting me know. Is this better?
A lot better. Thank you.
Okay, and when they hear sexual abuse, for example, they're like, oh man, this must be serious. We have to get involved. We have to make the right decision here. But even then, it's not automatic. The child abuse charges, and actually the animal cruelty charges as well, those are just slam dunks for the prosecution. The moment the jury, the public, people in society hear child abuse or neglect, they think, oh my goodness, we have to protect these vulnerable populations. And that's what leads to the knee-jerk reaction. That's why when we're in a system, a dependency system, a legal system that deals solely with child abuse or neglect, the overall stereotype from the outside looking in and sometimes from the inside looking in is, oh, these parents are monsters. We have to just focus on the children. And I think that needs to be resolved somehow, either by just changing the terminology at some point, because I think words do matter. But some change needs to happen where, parents aren't as demonized as they used to be.
Yeah, and you all really touched on it in different ways or another. And, who said this? Was it Judge Zeiler, or you alluded to it? And team, write this down, because this is going to have to be one of our fireside chat panels that focuses on the culture of fear that we have in these systems, the fear of not reporting, the fear of reuniting, the fear of the foster parent talking to the biological parent. And there's so much opposition as a result that is created. Even now, let's be honest, Lato doesn't talk to CLC all the time. Social workers aren't talking to different, people. We have this whole system where we're supposed to present a reunited front in support of the children and families we care about, but we're not always allowed to speak to each other for whatever reason. And that's a huge problem that we have to address if we really want to show up for our children and families. And, for me, when my husband, when he applied to date me, I have a whole application process. In there, it said, I'm going to be a foster parent one day once my children are older, because I want to be a part of the solution. I want to be a part of helping mothers and fathers reunite with their children and supporting those visits and supporting the reunification process, because I saw and experienced firsthand how that it doesn't exist. And so, Laura, when you touched on all the work you do in support of the parents and how you're seeing so many opportunities for the foster parents to work with the biological parents that will be healthy and healing and restorative, but they're not allowed because of red tape, that's some BS. And we need to address that, because that's a huge issue. Priscilla.
So, and I just wanted to say, I think that's why it's so important, going back to what Frank was saying about the parents and them, the services they're provided, and us, of course, being judged. This is why it's so important to refer to parent partners, because you don't know how many parents I've worked with that they come and they pop off in lobbies. Like we had a parent that she was kicking down the door to get back to, they took her kids. They're like, oh, we're gonna have a TDM, when it was TDMs. They're like, we're gonna have a TDM. Your kids are gonna be here so we can talk. And as soon as they took the kids back, they served her with the detention papers, and she flipped her lid, and she was a big woman, and she was kicking the door. I swear it was like a cartoon, like the door was like hanging on by the hinges. And me and my coworker at the time went and like calmed her down, right? And then we were talking to her, and we got to know her, we got to understand her, and we got to teach her, how to advocate. So her social worker was a piece of work, right? And like Frank was saying, like she was they had that social worker burnout, I think is what they call it. And so she was like, nope, she's just hood, she's ghetto, and we taught her, like, no, guess what? I don't care where you came from, how hood anybody thinks you are, like, you need to learn how to advocate for yourself in the appropriate manner. When they cancel your visits at the last minute, you don't come up in here popping off, acting all hood. Like, we're not. We're already labeled, right? We're already judged. Like, we're not going to come up here and prove their labels right. And we have to explain to parents, like, so that they understand. And this is where parents in partnership, man, we're awesome, not to toot my own horn, but we are awesome, because guess what? We can come at the parents in a different way than a social worker or anybody can come at them, because we've been there, and it's like, no, you can't come in here like that. Like, and I still get labeled, there's some social workers that they're like, oh, Priscilla, yeah, I'm like, I love you too, God bless you, but it's like, guess what? That mom though, she would come up in here after, and we worked with her whole case. We worked with her, and it was like, when you're mad and you want to blow up, you call us first. You blow up on me, because I understand your frustration. I understand you're mad at the system. I understand the system's faulty, but you don't call your social worker and call her all kinds of B's and all this and all that. You can't, because it proves those labels right. It proves that we don't know how to handle our emotions, that we don't know how to conduct ourselves in an appropriate manner when things don't go our way. We act like little kids, and we can't do that, And so in working with her, man, she would come up and she would have a problem, and she would sit here, she would chop it up with the security guards, and she would just sit here, and she'd like, nope, like, I'm waiting to talk to the duty worker of the day, or I'm waiting for the ARA, and she would sit there calm, mad as heck, but she learned how to conduct herself. She learned how to handle the no's within her case. And then regardless of her social worker was good or not, I'm like, no, you don't give them the tools that they need to keep your kids from you. You beat feet, girl, you beat feet, you do your classes. Don't wait for her to call you. You call her, you know, whether she likes you or not. You call her, you provide her your progress reports. You know, you got court coming up, they got to turn in that report 30 days before. Okay, so some of them might be a little bit late. Get that report 2 weeks before it's due, you know, and give it to her. Like, if you make her job easier, you catch more bees with honey than you do with vinegar. If you make that CSW's job just a little bit easier, and despite whether you like them or not, whether they like you or not, they can't put bad things about you in a court report. You know, they can't. And so even if they come out with a sour attitude or nothing, like, you kill them with kindness. And as much as it hurts, like, look, for my kid, there's no but I wouldn't kiss, excuse my language. But you give me chapstick, whatever, like, I'm gonna be nice. I'm gonna be super sweet, and I'm gonna clench my jaw, and I'm gonna bite the bullet, because that's for my baby. And there's nothing mean more to me in this world than my baby. And then going to the other part, right? So how Ms. Thor was saying about the foster parent thing, right? I became a foster parent to some of my gang member homeboys' kids, you know, and so I have their kids. I have 7 right now. And it's hard, but being able, I think, me knowing where they came from, knowing that, yeah, they had good intentions and they made heck of mistakes, but being there with no judgment, right? Because I've been there, being there with no judgment, not like when they were going on visits. And it's sad to say my kids haven't seen their parents in 3 years, because the parents are just not doing what they're supposed to do. But we tried, I hecka tried. The first year before reunification was terminated, man, I tried. I'd beat them. I'd pick them up for visits. Like, you know, like, come on, don't make excuses. You don't make excuses to make it to your dope man. You know, like, you can't make excuses to make it to your baby, you know? And so they did good for a little bit, but I mean, they fell off, you know? And until then, it sucks, but I make excuses for them, to my babies, because I don't want my babies to hurt. You know, those are my babies. I don't want them to hurt. Like, we drive by sometimes and we see their mom on the corner, and it breaks my heart. My little girl, she cries for her mom. And I tell her, like, it's okay. Like, you can miss your mom, you know, like, that is normal. Like, you don't hurt my feelings, you know, like, I missed my mom too when I didn't have her, you know, and it's terrible. And I just hope that one day that, you know, all these parents do get it together, because these kids suffer so much, you know. And I just, for 2 of my kids, they're going back with they're going this weekend back with their relative caregiver. And when I told them, they were happy, and they were like, oh, I'm kind of sad. I'm like, why are you sad? They're like, because we love you. I'm like, oh, I love you guys too. This doesn't mean I'm not going to see you guys no more. Like, you guys can come over whenever you want, like, and come visit, you know? And they're like, okay, you promise? I'm like, yeah. So, you know, it's just, but I had a great relationship, not with their parents, because there's a no contact order, but with the grandma. You know, my little boy, he would have night terrors. And the only way to get him to calm down was to call their grandma, you know, like, I need your help. You know, like, he's scared. He's still half asleep. And I'm like, I'm scared, you know, because my little papa's is right here flipping out, you know, and it's like, man, like, that relationship between relative caregivers or people that are trying to become relative caregivers and the foster parents, like, that is so important, because without that lady's help, man, I would have been lost a lot of times, because they have issues that I don't understand, and I'm trying to, but the grandma understands, you know. And so mine and her relationship, it's great, you know. And I thank God that we were able to have that. But again, it's because I don't think I held any judgment, you know. I didn't have any judgment against the family or anything that happened, you know, to the kids. And so that's very important as well. And I wish that there was more foster parents out there that didn't hold those judgments, you know, against people. We're all people and we make mistakes.
And Priscilla, I want you to always toot your own horn, because it's worthy of being tooted. And I do want to comment on one thing before we get into one more question with our last 5 minutes, is that social workers also need to meet parents halfway too, and understand they are going to be angry and upset. And one of my worst fears that I have nightmares about to this day is having my children removed from whatever reason, because I know the power that's there with having them removed. And in every dream I have, I'm that one popping the lid off and knocking down doors, give me my baby. So I'm afraid of how I would react in that situation. And we never know how we would react in that situation when it comes to your babies being removed from you. And so as social workers and attorneys and everyone else, we need to give them grace. We need to have parent partners that are going to be there to support them through this also traumatic moment for them, because we can't expect them to come in, yes, ma'am, and be grateful and be gracious for, you taking my child and the support. We need to realize that they're in a totally different space. They're not trusting of these systems, and to meet them halfway and not always hold their anger and resentment against them, because that is this big stereotype we have too. So it's meet them halfway, because I would be mad as hell, and I already know, and I'm afraid of how I would react if my children were ever taken from me. We have a ton of questions, but I want to get to some of the Q&A because folks have really just committed their time, and we have 4 minutes. So let's see. Actually, it kind of alludes to some of the comments in the chat too. And I think it's important to touch on while we have Laura here, Brittany and everyone else. A big piece to children not being reunified in some cases is the bond between the foster parent and the caregiver and the child, and how as a result of that, they could hinder the reunification process, because now these kids are cute, they're adorable, many of them, and we come to love them. How do we address that? What do we do, as parents, foster parents who, we love these children now, but we also want to support the reunification process? Like, how do we help the parents? What
Sure.
should they be doing, Laura?
I think, foster parents are left in the dark, rightfully so in many cases for confidentiality purposes. But because we're left in the dark, we cannot prepare our hearts and we cannot prepare the children as well. And so that's kind of where we're thinking and where that bond really comes in. And when things, there can always be surprises, of course, but giving a little bit of an update or some thoughts, or this is what's being recommended, this is a general timeline to expect, can be very helpful so we can prepare emotionally and can be strong for the family and the children. Mm-hmm. And I think also just better access to support groups and one-on-one support, and just thinking of that as well and prioritizing it. Support groups, sure, there's plenty, but when you need it, you can never find one. I think COVID has really hurt foster parents in that sense. Lots of support has been taken away, and we've also taken on a greater role in monitoring phone calls and video chats and visits. And so what I have seen and what a lot of families I've worked with, that support and those encouragement or advice even on here's how we can shift our focus a little, here's some things you can do to support the family, a lot of that has been lost. And I'm looking forward for that to come back again for foster parents to better support the family and be emotionally ready to say goodbye.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Laura. And Brittany, in the last minute, a big piece to reunification failing is that of housing barriers. A lot of parents don't have access to housing, aren't able to show they have a stable environment. Can you tell us what you're doing over at Butterflies Haven and why that's so important to the reunification process for the children in foster care, or former foster youth that also have children with open cases or possibly reunifying, why that's so important for the population you serve?
Of course, I think that definitely housing is one of the most important things, because how can we be great parents if we have nowhere to house our children, and we have to worry about where they're going to be sleeping night by night in ourselves. So the most important thing is definitely at Butterflies Haven is supplying housing for these young mothers to know whether they have their children in custody or they're actually trying to get their children back, that they now have a stable, safe environment to provide for their children. For the ones that are then trying to reunify with their children, they now have a place to show that they have this access to stable housing. But also at Butterflies Haven, it's not just giving them a roof and somewhere to stay to provide a safe environment. We are embracing them, we are teaching them, we are guiding them, we are teaching them to learn to advocate for themselves as well in a calm demeanor, and also be able to just know that they have the extra support that sometimes the social workers don't give to the parents. We then come in, for myself, I'm like embracing all the young women, like for the ones that don't have their children, I'm like, hey, every single day that you wake up should be focused around what can you do next to make sure your child is then returned to you. And as someone else spoke earlier about not waiting, Priscilla, I believe it was, not waiting for them to tell you what is required. Mm-hmm. are you being frustrated because you may not have an alcohol and drug problem, but they're requesting it? Even if whatever the case is, just letting them know like, hey, if you want your children back and you love your children enough, it's nothing that you will not do. And as long as you're showing up for yourself, I'm going to support you 100% if it's taking you and driving you to counseling and whatever, however I can be supportive there for the young mothers at Butterflies Haven. I'm there. I'm showing up for them. I'm sharing resources. A lot of times they're like, well, my social worker was supposed to give me a list and didn't. Like, okay, here's Google. Let's find it. Let's make calls. I'm making calls on the back end. We're figuring out ways to make sure that their process is then implemented in this home environment so that they know they're not alone. They know that, yes, this is your housing opportunity, but also you have the support from myself and other people that come in to put in time and volunteer time to make sure that they know, like, even though you've been through it, you're coming out of foster care, you're learning to parent, like you're not alone and you have that support. And just knowing that they have that, and knowing that they have an extra voice to fight for them and to also just be that extra push for them, because sometimes it does get draining and they're like, why do I have to keep doing all this? I've done this. I've heard one of them say, like, I've done this class 3 times. Do it again. If I have to sit there with you and do it and we do question and answers together, I'm here. Right. And just knowing that they have that extra support makes it a lot easier to go through the process. And sometimes that's something that they don't have. And just bridge that into the support from the foster parent. I think that is something that should be encouraged with through the social workers, is to actually encourage the parent and foster parent relationship so that when the children are reunified, one, is not a surprise to the foster parent, but also 2, the door is open for that foster parent to still be a mentor and still, whether it's picking the child up and taking them to soccer practice or taking them to get their nails done, whatever it is, to be a support to that parent, that relationship can then be built in the time of reunification if the relationship from the parent and the foster parent is encouraged. And I think a lot of times we don't see that. We see where social workers are then like, hey, don't do as much communicating. This is the only time that you have the calls, but why? And that's what we need to start asking. Why? Why can't we go above and beyond and be more supportive? Why can't we? Like, just because the child was removed, unless it's like something insane, like 9 times out of 10, like we spoke, it's just based on different parenting styles that our system don't agree is great parenting, right? So let's then be that support and show up for them. So that is what I'm trying to create at Butterflies Haven, all in a nutshell.
Thank you all. I think this is our first time going over 1 o'clock, but I could not stop you. And we could talk all day about reunification. Thank you all so much for your valuable input and support. We'll try to get through. Thank you for answering some of the questions in the chat, those of you that were able to. I appreciate you all. Everyone, let's step up and show up for our children and families, for our foster parents, for our social workers, for each other, and be a part of restoring and healing our communities. Thank you all. Have an amazing Friday.